Of our third speaker of the morning. I have known Reinier now for some years and blessed to have continued to be able to work with him. Just like we often look to Wales for information, on an equal basis, we certainly look more south to the government of Netherlands. We've had the privilege of working with the government of the Netherlands now in the field of circular procurement for several years. And it's really become a true North Star for us in terms of our work in Canada. We are so blessed to have today with us Mr. Reinier Guijt, who is Senior Policymaker on Sustainable Public Procurement and specifically Circular Procurement for the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. I'm really excited for you to learn from someone who has incredible passion, not only expertise, but passion to create a more sustainable world through procurement, and really a lead for a new circular procurement manifesto to create further involvement for local governments. So from a country famous for its colorful tulips, beautiful football, and uncomfortable wooden shoes, and circular procurement, please welcome Reinier Guijt.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing in the Netherlands at the moment. I'm Reinier Guijt. It's a really hard name to pronounce in English. I'm a policymaker for the Dutch government, and actually my job is to work on creating a circular economy by 2050 at the latest, and that's our goal. And when I'm talking, I'm hoping to share my screen with you to start my presentation. And more specifically, my task is circular procurement. And I think I'm on screen now.
Yeah, you are. We can see you.
Very good, thank you. Well, when you're talking about circular procurement, this is really the ambition that you should have, and that's the ambition that we wrote down in our national ambition document, saying sustainability is no longer a byproduct of our procurement, it's the main product. And of course, being an ambition, we are not there yet. And what I would like to do today is to talk to you about, well, not all the cool stuff that we're doing, but the things that we've learned on the way. How do you make procurement policy? How do you make it work? Because procurement policy is really hard. I've been doing this for 5 years, and it's it's been hard to get things going. And I think it's good to start with the challenge that we're facing. And this, of course, is the Netherlands. You all recognize it for the beautiful tulips, and the wooden shoes aren't on here, but this is also not photoshopped. This is what it looks like all day. When you look at public procurement in the Netherlands, we have a couple of procurers here. Of course, we have the national government, which is a really big procurer and which is a really big driver. We have our 12 provinces, which are increasingly big drivers, and we have, of course, 355 municipalities. And within those municipalities, of course, there are a lot of departments doing making their own procurement choices. So the IT department and the construction department and the infrastructure department, and they're all making their own choices. So we're talking about a lot of public procurers, and together they procure for about 85 billion euros a year, so about half what you're doing in Canada, a little less. But more importantly, we are causing almost 33 megatons of carbon emissions with those procurements. That's scope 1, 2, and 3. And that's a lot. For the Netherlands, that's a lot. To give you an impression, that's about the amount that we still need to reduce to make it to our Paris agreements. So that's a lot of CO2. Oddly enough, it's also almost exactly the amount that you would get if we would buy a plane ticket and a tour ticket from the Netherlands to Canada for every person in the Netherlands. So that's, maybe we shouldn't do that, but it's a lot of CO2. Now, when you try to reduce that CO2, you can use procurement, and you can use circular procurement, because circularity can maybe reduce that by half if you would do it really well. Now, we have a procurement law in the Netherlands based on European legislation, but it doesn't contain any links yet, at least, to do mandatory public procurement. So everything we do is voluntary. So all these procurers, they're all working with us on a voluntary basis. And in the future, the European Green Deal, which has been launched, I think, almost 2 years ago, and which is currently being worked out into all kinds of different sectors, it might give us some more mandatory things for different sectors like IT or infrastructure or whatever. But for now, this is what we're doing. And if you have voluntary procurement, what you're not getting is bulk impact. We are seeing a lot of wonderful initiatives. We have a lot of pilots. We have really enthusiastic organizations working on circularity, working on circular procurement. We have great examples, but we're not making bulk impact yet. And so that's the challenge, really, to scale up this impact. That's the challenge that we're facing in the Netherlands. And I'm pretty sure that's the challenge we're facing in a lot of places. I think our National Measurement Institute, they investigated this, and for 2 sectors, they looked at the infrastructure sector, roads. We have some really great advances in circular roads and in circular office furniture. And they found that only 4% of the impact that we could have made was actually being made. So 96% was still being done in a linear, unsustainable way. That's a big challenge. So how do we meet this challenge? Where do we start? Well, of course, a lot of people, when you talk to policymakers, most of them, they don't know how procurement works. So they say, well, just next year, we'll be buying 100% circular concrete or whatever. And that's, of course, a great thing to want, but it just doesn't happen like that. Then when you continue the conversation, they say, well, let's do circular criteria, because that's, if you set down a set of criteria, surely that's the key, that's the silver bullet. Everybody will start buying the same things, the market will change, we'll save the world. Wonderful. Now you can hear from my tone that, of course, it doesn't work like that. Of course, criteria are really important, and we have this fancy tool, and I put a screenshot up here, and there's a link at the bottom for the English version if you're interested. We have a lot of criteria. We have criteria for 46 different product groups, and people use this a lot. And obviously they do, because procurers don't know every sector as well as others. You have to know your market, you have to know what to ask for. And so these things help, and we update this every year. And in fact, I heard just the other day that in a few weeks we're set to achieve 100,000 use, which is really great. It's being used a lot, but it's not the silver bullet. Of course, we believed that when we started out. I think 10 years ago, we started out and we said, well, criteria, that's the thing. So we created a lot of criteria, really wonderful documents, great ambition, and we monitored the uptake. And after almost 2 years, we had 100% compliance across the board. So all public procurers were buying using our criteria. So it was a whopping success, except, of course, nothing changed, because people were just saying, well, you have to use the criteria, you have to comply with the criteria, and then they bought the lowest price. So actually the market was of worth, because now they had to pay for proving that they could fulfill all these criteria, while at the same time people weren't buying their green products. So that was exactly the opposite of what we intended. So not a silver bullet then. Mind you, I'm not saying that these were lazy procurers. I'm saying that their organizations didn't feel the need to achieve this. They had not internalized the goals that we were trying to achieve, the climate goals or the material goals or the social goals. So it was really just an administrative thing. They said, well, you have to use the criteria and that's it. So what we needed was to change our game. We needed to make sure that this is what they would be saying. We need sustainability and not just ask for criteria and not do anything with it. So what I want to do with you today is go into 3 key messages, 3 things that we are working on right now as a Dutch government, trying to make sure that it does start to work. And I hope that it will help you in your thinking and it will help you get started as well. First, it's about creating political commitment. It's about creating ownership with the right people. And it's about pooling your strength to create real impact. And I'll be going into all three of these. First, creating commitment. One thing that I've noticed is that if you want to change the market, if you want to change the market to change the world for the better, and you want to do it through procurement, then first you have to change yourself. You have to change your own organization. That's a real transition. It's a big transition because it takes a lot of work. And what I've noticed in the Netherlands is that this usually starts with just a few people, one or two or three, who have the ambition, who have the drive, who have the vision to change, and who go out and try to make a difference. And these people are really vitally important. Every organization that I've spoken to, every big pilot that actually worked out started with these people. So they're really important. And the more freedom they get to do this special work, the better it gets. And this is especially true for circularity and circular procurement, because it's new, it's different, it can be somewhat scary, because you have to start cooperating with the market in different ways. So these are the people we need. Except, of course, they can't change their organization without political backup. They can start small, they usually do. They start with a pilot. They show that circular procurement isn't really scary. It can be done within budget. Sometimes it even saves on the budget. But at some point you have to get out of the piloting phase and you have to get real. And then you need the support, because you will meet a lot of barriers on the way. And that's not because people don't want to be sustainable or don't want to be circular. It's because organizations don't just change, or organizations are optimized for the current situation. So they hate to change. They're resistant to change. And that's the barriers you will meet in every step of the way. So what can you do? An important thing is to get your politicians on board, as I said. And to get there, you have to start from their own ambitions. And some organizations have circular ambitions, but even if they don't, I have seen in the Netherlands, and I'm sure it's the same for Canada and for many other countries, many organizations in the world, many municipalities or regions or countries, they want to reduce carbon, or they want to provide jobs, or they want to stimulate local businesses, or perhaps they want to simply boost innovation and become an innovation hub. And all of these things you can easily link to circular procurement. So that's where you need to start. And the second step is that you need to help your political leaders to understand how it's done, because they meet the same barriers from the other side. They come from the top side. They want to achieve their goals, and often they don't know how. And you have to help them by translating this into concrete actions that you can actually take as an organization. And procurement is a very important, it's a very powerful driver, but it doesn't just happen. You have to pave the way for them to understand how it's done. And an important step in that is making sure it's measurable. Mark your starting point, determine your footprint, do a spend analysis, make sure that you have numbers, and then report on what you achieve. In the Netherlands, we try to promote this way of thinking by creating a political manifesto, the Sustainable Public Procurement Manifesto. We're now in the process of writing a new one, which is following the earlier one. And basically it creates all of these points. It just follows these points, say, well, you want to use your procurement to achieve your own ambitions, and these are the steps you have to take. And almost half the municipalities in the Netherlands, half the governments in the Netherlands have signed this manifesto. I'm really proud of that. And it created a lot of movement. So maybe that would be a thing to think about. Of course, if you have your politicians on board and you have your enthusiastic procurers on the floor, you're only halfway there, because there are a lot of people in between that you still have to change. You're fighting organizational inertia, and you have to make sure that they move with you. And a vitally important question there is, who takes ownership of circular procurement? And because it's called circular procurement, it usually works like this. There's a political ambition, and the procurers, they say, well, circular procurement, start procuring, and the procurer gets the unenviable task to convince the project manager and the budget holder and the lawyers and the middle management and who else that they have to change. And of course, they have other topics that are top of mind for them, like costs and time and complexity. And in fact, circularity might be perceived as a threat to all of these. So they're not really that eager to move. And this happens all the time. This is one of the reasons that you're not getting this bulk impact. People don't want this on their plate. So what you should be having is more like this. Make sure that the ownership of circular procurement lands with the project manager. Make sure that it's embedded in your organization, and because if it's on his plate, if he's the one who has to look at cost and time and complexity and sustainability or circularity or whatever, then he can go to the procurer and say, well, help me make this more circular. And then the procurer can do what he's good at, because he knows his market, he knows his stuff, and he can really help and make a difference. And this is how it's supposed to work. And as you can see, I've added 2 of these extra green wheels in here. And I'll start with the one at the bottom, because that's usually where it starts, and it links to the previous slide. I've marked it as informal. That's really the people who don't have a formal job pushing this agenda, but who are making an effort. The people doing pilots, the people sharing what they've learned, creating awareness, making sure that things start happening, and most important, linking the different people, making sure that the project managers and the lawyers and the procurers and the political people and the policymakers, that they talk to each other, because they're in different worlds, and they might share the same ambitions, but they don't necessarily cooperate in a fluent line. And getting them in one room is a really powerful way to start making these wheels turn. And of course, the other green wheel is the more formal side, which is about making sure that circularity is part of the whole line throughout your organization. It's being measured. There are measurable goals. It's in your formal procurement documents, etc. And making sure that it's linked in every step of the way. And when you have these 2 wheels, then things can start happening. And this is really, well, I can't stress enough how important this is. This is the essence of what we'll be working on in the Netherlands for the next 5 years. And I'm sure if we get this to work, then we'll start seeing some results. Now, the last part is about pooling our strength. And of course, procurement is basically about changing the market. And well, you can't change the market if you don't have sufficient procurement power. And quite often this is the case. You're just one organization, and you might be a really big one. For instance, in the Netherlands, if you want to change the asphalt market, we can do it as a national government, because we're the major player. But usually you're not. You're alone, and there may be a lot of procurers, but they're all asking slightly different things. Also, you need the right knowledge. You need to know what to ask. You need to be on top of your game, know the market. That's a lot for one procurer. So what we thought in the Netherlands, why don't we bring those procurers together and pool them? We called it buyer groups. It's a term we stole actually from the European Commission. I'm happy to give them the credits for it. And over the last 2 years, we created a lot of them. And this is a list of buyer groups that we created. And it's basically just bringing buyers together in a knowledge network, but with more ambition, with more commitment also. So these buyers, they can start buying together. Well, no, they start doing their own tenders. They keep their own tenders. It's not joint procurement because that's really hard. They do their own tenders, but they share what they learn. They share. They can do a joint market strategy. They can do joint market engagement. So they pull together in how they ask their questions and how they want to change that market, because that's what we really want. These are all really important topics that we decided we should support with these buyer groups, and many of these are part of our sustainable or circular economy policy, and we boost it. We try to boost it with these buyer groups, and I want to point out a few of them because they were real eye-openers for me, especially the circular solar panels and wind turbines. I personally never thought about how those things also need to become circular, because if we want to have a more sustainable energy, then at some point you will get a lot of old solar panels, old wind turbines, and we'll need to have a lot more of them. So this is I'm really glad that this is one of the things we're pushing. Another thing I want to point out is ICT. ICT, of course, is a huge sector, and even a buyer group in the Netherlands is way too small to change that market. So what we did is we started what we call the Circular and Fair ICT Pact, which is a collaboration between governments of different countries, and we're all trying to build buyer groups and really pull our strengths on a international level. And I'm glad to mention it here because the Circular Innovation Council is also a signing member of this pact. I'm really happy they are. Okay, I have one final message that I want to give you, which is this: just start. It may be hard, it's a long road, but you may start small, you may start doing what you know, but just start, because really that's the essence. Every step you take towards a more circular world is a step in the right direction. Thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Reinier. So much great content in all of these presentations. Just forgot to call out for all of the panelists and our delegates, of course, use the chat function to tee up your questions, because we're going to have a little fireside chat at the end of this with all of our speakers. But Reinier, this whole idea of vertical integration, you know, the continual emphasis you played on all levels, right from political right through down to practitioner. Everybody has to, I think the word you used is internalize these goals. Can you talk a little bit about the process that the Dutch in particular have undertaken to get from internalization now through to formalizing buyer groups? What practically did you do?
We're really this is really a journey of discovery for us, and especially internalization part. And it's hard to do in English because we have a word for it that's non-translatable for some reason. But it's basically the internal client. He needs to be. You need to get him on board, and we even considered ditching the term procurement and making it about this internal client. But that was one step too far. But too far. What we're really doing right now is experimenting. We have a lot of organizations just trying how is it done? How can you get people to cooperate within your organization to make sure that the ball starts rolling? And we're learning a lot from that. And it's sometimes a bit scary because those are big projects, and then I think, wow, we have 355 municipalities. How will we ever spread this across the Netherlands, let alone spread it across the globe? But it's really a job that needs to be done. We have been focusing on procurers for far too long, and they're end of pipe.
Yeah.
And as for the buyer groups,
the human change. Keep going, yeah, please.
Yeah, as for the buyer groups, one of the things that we've learned in the past is to get not just the procurers on board, but also the people, the project manager or the budget holder, or get them in the room as well. And then you get your bigger results. And it makes it really powerful. So that's one of the
sounds like
just they link into each other. Yeah.
Just as much internal work or internal attention that has to be paid to externally to your vendors and suppliers. This is a process of human change management, which needs to be overcome and can't be overstated. So thank you for making that emphasis. Thank you again, Reinier, for the presentation. We're already getting a lot of kudos in the chat box about how practical you came to the discussion, and you really helped us sort of bridging this gap between where most of Europe is on circular procurement and where Canada is starting from. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. If